let's talk a bit about the song. So you made this really, really amazing version of "To the Heart," and I was wondering when you first. So if I remember correctly, you approach remixes in the way that you take the vocals only and create a new track from scratch. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. If I can, if I have that option, I always do it like that. Like I believe I had that opportunity this time around. So
Yeah.
I do think I don't think I ever heard your original. Actually, I think I heard your original for the first time when it was released a few days ago.
Yeah. It's very interesting to me, this process, and I just love what you did with it because you somehow preserved the emotion, but you took it in a completely different correct direction. It's just very sort of, it has an uplifting feel to it. It has the sort of mixture of bitterness and happiness. That's really interesting, and the original track did not have that, so it's great that you brought that
I
out.
I, I think that's because your vocals carry so much of this song. So like it was rather easy to find a good mood or to find the right mood because most of the mood in the song was like preserved in the vocal files. That's
Yeah.
not always the case. That's quite often not the case. Quite often, I get a very different impression from the vocals
Yeah.
than originally intended, perhaps. But in this case, I would tend to agree with you. Like there was there's a sense to this song that transcended your arrangement.
Thank you. I think it's really great that it worked the way it did. And when I first heard it, from the moment I first heard it, it was just locked in my head in the best possible way. And I was wondering, what sort of themes and emotions did you connect with the lyrics and with the vocals when you heard them? Is that something you like to identify, or do you not work in that way? How do you actually approach the remaking of a song?
Most of the time, at least, I don't think that much about it. I try to work the arrangement until it feels right. There are exceptions. Sometimes there is something in the lyrics or something in the song that I need to address, and in those cases, I will very much take an intellectual approach. But in general, I like to treat the song as. I mean, I'm an art historian. Songs are subject. I try to treat them as subject and not like try to impose things on them, but rather see what they will work with, see what I can do to work with them as subject. So in this case, I believe it started with the bass line, the tiny little the bass line that has the it has the mod wheel slide, and that was the funniest thing because I had no idea what key your song was in. I just knew the tempo, and that little that little bass line just fit, and
Yeah.
it fit like all over the entire song on the first attempt, except one exception where I had to cut you up a bit on the second verse. But otherwise, it was just smooth sailing. It was a very like breezy song to remix because it felt like it was very obvious what it wanted to be, like very obvious what
Yeah.
it should have been. So I didn't. Some remixes are very difficult. Like you work your fingers to the bone and you're still not happy because you don't feel like you can interact with the work honestly, there's something in the way. But in this case, it was just very like. I mean, I'd like to think that I know you reasonably well by now, and like know what you're about as an artist in
Yeah.
to some extent. So maybe that helped.
Yeah, it really does feel like that, and I think the song reflects it. It feels right. There was never a moment where I questioned anything. You know, when you listen for the first time to this version, and I didn't know what to expect, but then I was like, yeah, that's just it. Like, there's just no question if anything should be different. That's the way it should be. And how are you happy with the version, the way it turned out?
I mean, it's funny that you should say it like that because I listened to it yesterday, and like there are things that I probably wouldn't have done the same way now.
Hmm.
But on the other hand, I can't really say that they're the wrong things. They're
Hmm.
just things that happen to be at the time. I'm quite the reason I sing the way I sing on it is because I had a sore throat. That like I had a sore throat for weeks, and my singing was impaired for a bit, and I had to finish.
Hmm.
So I sang it like that, and it ended up giving off a bit of a like I've heard people say it gives off an editor's vibe,
Hmm.
and I don't think I don't sound particularly like myself, but it fits the song.
Yeah.
There's this post punk feel to it because of it, because I'm singing in a way that I perhaps describe as rather than good.
Well, I found it very distinctive. I think it is very distinctive, and yeah, it is different from how I know you from most of your songs. But yeah, again, it's sometimes a song or a version of a song has to be a product of its time, and it's
Yeah,
just right that way. Yeah.
yeah, and this is very much like it's very much a product of that, which you can see in the video too. Like it's very much a product of a very grey and damp and cold
Yeah.
Swedish spring.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, comparatively, the spring here was more, had a lot of flowers and a lot of very yeah, contrasting elements. So it's yeah, quite a
Oh
good video
yeah,
that reflects that.
I was very cold when we did those shots.
Oh, I'm sorry to put you through that. So you're basically coming from a summer of lots of gigs, festivals in Europe, but also further abroad in Canada. In general, when you perform, as opposed to when you work in the studio, when you compose, when you create, is that a different mode for you, or do you feel like this comes from the same creative source?
Performing is very much something very different and takes a lot out of me. This summer didn't end up the way that we had hoped. We were hoping on being able to like produce new material and work a lot in the studio this summer. But in the end, we were doing gigs like every week,
Yeah.
and the rest of the time we were either sick. I got COVID in Canada. Was sick for 2 weeks, and
Oh,
we've been
didn't know
playing
that.
basically every weekend. So we haven't had time to do that much studio work, and like between gigs, we've just been really, really exhausted.
Yeah.
So it's been a very intense summer. Like we've been around a lot. It was not the summer that I had hoped for, but on
Mhm.
the other hand, like we've had all the gigs we've done, the audience have been all of the places we've been, the audience has been very generous, very happy to see us, and it's been nice to do a lot of gigs. It's the first year since after the pandemic that we've
Mm.
actually had a steady stream of work in that regard. So that's nice. I just forgotten how incredibly exhausting it can be.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, firstly, all the traveling, but then also you have to, on stage, you have to just go into extrovert mode. And as you said, if it's a very different mode for you, I can definitely understand that. And then there's just no space to have the peace and quiet and the calm and the muse to just create. It just doesn't work that way. Like time wise, maybe it could, but energy wise, it just
Yeah,
doesn't. I guess. Yeah.
yeah, but it's like doing the gigs themselves is never a problem. But the traveling, like it's like being on stage, performing on stage. That's a different battery. But flying,
Hmm.
being on airports, that's the
Yeah.
same battery as studio work.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that's I can get that. Yeah. So I want to talk a bit. Obviously, I'm doing Natural Darkness, my first solo album with this project, and it's kind of a special thing for me because I've only ever released singles and EPs with this project,
Mm.
and even though I've released, I don't know, I mean 30, 50 things before the album, I hadn't realized how different it is to approach an album and to create almost an hour worth of music at the same time in the same sort of space with the same me. So I was wondering if you think back on your very first album with Ashbury Heights, how how has that changed you? Did that change you at the time? If you look back, because it's sometimes very interesting to look back at these things and see, oh, this was a pivotal moment in some way. Do you look back at this album as, this was the beginning of something or a change of something?
The first Ashbury album was very rushed. Basically, it's most of the tracks from the demos we had released up until that point,
Hmm.
and then there's a few new songs. And the new songs came about because basically we didn't really feel like we wanted to just release a demo compilation.
Yeah.
So that was mainly ego. And in hindsight, there are some songs on the album that I would have rather scrapped and used more songs from the demos. There were at least there was at least like two songs from the demos that didn't get on the album that should have been there instead of a couple of songs that ended up there. Um, but we were under a lot of pressure to release something quickly,
Yeah.
and in the end, I mean, looking back on it, it's still rather cohesive because we didn't exist for very long before we got signed. We started out like in autumn of 2005. We were signed in February of 2006, and we did two demos in less than 6 months. So it's pretty cohesive anyway. Like the tracks are feel like they belong together. Um,
So let me ask you this. If you would have had, a couple of years unsigned, with no pressure whatsoever, do you think Ashbury Heights would be a different band now? Or do you think you just would have a different development, but you'd end up in the same place?
if we'd have like a soup trap situation, like a rich benefactor just like giving us a lot of time and space to just create.
Hmm.
Um, that is, I mean, Supertramp sounds like absolutely nothing else. So maybe that would have been the same for us. I don't know. I know that after the first album, when we went back into the studio and worked on the sequel, um, we did a lot of experimentation, but we also did a lot
Mm.
of. We got stuck a lot. And we also like ended up trying a lot of different things that in the end like wasn't accepted by the label. So we did that album, like we recorded that album in like three completely different ways in completely different styles.
Right.
And in the end, the third way we did it was very much similar to what we had done before, because that was the way that we could get it out.
Yeah.
I don't think. I think it would have been. I think it would have been very different. I think there's. I think art that's created like in a safe environment and like with plenty of time to gestate. Sometimes that turns out really well. Like those albums with artists who, you know, basically they were around for a long time and they got a record deal pretty late, and then they just put the best songs from their demos into
Yeah.
one album, and then that first album is just incredible because it's like 10 years of all the best stuff.
Yeah.
And then the second album is always a disappointment because now suddenly you just have 1 year, and you're also like touring and doing stuff, and it's so suddenly it's completely different. So I definitely think that a Ashbury Heights album recorded in some kind of like tranquil state would be very different. That hasn't happened, so I can't speak to the quality.
It's hard to get to that place unless you do this sort of thing full time, fully financed without any worries, I guess. It's for me it's the
Yeah,
same. I chose not to include any old songs, and just write something completely new. And then you have to restrict yourself at least time wise, because otherwise it never gets finished. Like I postponed it 3 times secretly. um
yeah,
and then eventually I just had to say this is what it is. How
yeah, yeah.
has what's the biggest difference in creating an album these days? Like, what are the things that you do completely differently? What are the things that have not changed?
I
Because you're
mean,
working on one
yeah,
in a book.
and I mean that one doesn't really like the one we're working on currently, and the one we've been working on since 2019, I think. Was it
Yeah,
19 that I got in touch with you? Yeah.
yeah,
So
I think so.
19 was when we started, and that album isn't like, I mean, it's gonna be out this year, but it's been postponed twice, I think, secretly. We've never set a date for it,
Yeah,
but we've indicated, and that's been that's a mistake. Never indicate. But we've indicated that it might have been like we said like in 2021. Oh, this year is definitely gonna come out, and then it didn't because like pandemic went on for longer,
yeah,
and then we were like last year, okay, well, pandemic is over now, it's definitely coming out, and then it didn't because of the pandemic, all of us got new jobs and our lives changed like a lot.
yeah.
And it turned out that it was hard to find the time for it. So now then 2023, we're like, oh, this time, now we're definitely doing it. And when we were approached the record label in March, April this year, like sometime this spring, and said like, okay, we're done, let's do it. They were like, no, we can't do it. You haven't released any singles lately, so the algorithm isn't like ready to receive your album.
Uh-huh.
We must prep the algorithm to receive the album, so we need more singles from you. So now we're releasing singles again. Because otherwise, apparently, the album will just get lost if it's released.
Well, it helps to release every 4 weeks or so leading up to it, but
Yeah,
yeah, it's a very
yeah,
technical thing.
and that, I mean, that's basically impossible because it takes 5 weeks. When a song is like mastered and the cover is done and everything is prepped, it takes 5 weeks minimum to get it out. Um, and we don't have like we would have to be able to work like full time
Yeah.
to like prep one song every 4 weeks for 3 months. It's just not, it's not doable. So since we also have to make a video for each one of them.
Yeah. You have been collaborating a lot in the last few years. I think way more than before the pandemic, or this is sort of the divider in time, the pandemic. And this seems to be something that's working really well for Ashbury Heights. And I've loved every single that you brought out, because I think there's just something interesting about getting a different influence coming in and seeing what that does with your style and your music. So how do you find it? Has it changed the way you work? Has it changed your musicianship in any way to be collaborating so frequently?
No, nah, I don't think so. It's actually it's I guess I've been lucky. Like all the people who I've approached for collaborations have been very efficient and very like nice and very forthcoming, and it's been very easy. It's been like, here's the song, here's what I think, and then I've just set it on, and then you just send me a lot of lovely takes, and then I mix it. It's been very easy. It's been very smooth, all of it. The reason I originally started out doing collaboration was because we didn't have a singer.
Yeah.
We didn't have a second singer because Teija quit, and I was preparing to do some kind of interim project with a lot of collaborators. Then halfway through the collaborations, Jasmine came back again. So now it's like half collaborations, half original OG crew again.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, that has worked out pretty nicely. Our label is really happy about the collaborations. They've been telling us they want more of them.
Great.
I think that for our next proper album, we will probably not be doing any collaborations. We will try and do like one cohesive album that is more something more proper. I guess this album is kind of a collection of old odds and ends. Like most of the songs are quite old. They've just been. I've finished. We've finished them now, but they've been like bits and pieces of them have been around for a very long time.
Yeah.
So it's very much like a cleaning house, like
Sweeping all the songs out.
releasing. Yeah, it was like all these things that I mean, I get stressed out by projects that aren't finished. Like I get stressed out from not finishing video games if I start them. So I need to finish things when I start them, and in
Yeah.
this case, it's been a lot of stuff that's just I want to finish because a lot of these songs. I mean, obviously, a lot of these songs are good songs.
Yeah.
They just haven't had the opportunity to reach their potential before because they didn't really fit into what we were doing at the time, or the band couldn't agree at the time on whether it was good or not. But then when I started this in 2019, I was the only one with a say, so I could like, this is good and this is good. Let's do this one. We had some of these songs have been hotly debated before.
I've done a lot of collaborations myself, and for the album, I really wanted the core material to be just me. Even though it's so much fun to collaborate with others, and it's nice to have these different influences, there's also something about creating a body of work that is just, a small group of people, or in my case, one person, and it's just all very, it just all sticks together and belongs together in a way.
Yeah, yeah. No, we for the next album we have set a goal that it's supposed to be like it's going to be maybe 12 tracks. It's going to have a very clear theme all through, and
Yeah.
it will be only new songs, and it will be very focused and much more cohesive. So it'll be the exact opposite of the Ghost House sessions, and then after that, we'll see.
So we can expect a few more singles potentially before the end of the year, and then the album. Is that the
Yeah,
plan?
if everything goes according to plan, there's going to be two more singles. The first one is going to drop on the 5th of October,
Great.
and the second one hopefully then in early November, and then the album.
Great. Well, that's very exciting. I have one bonus question. I'm not sure if you want to answer it or not, but I'll ask it anyway because
Oh
I've
yes,
asked this question. I've asked this question to a lot of artist friends recently, and I find it very interesting. Do you have a first memory of you engaging with music, you experiencing music, or making music? Your earliest memory of that?
that depends on like what you mean with engaging with music. My earliest memory of like some kind of engagement with music is from when I was maybe 4 years old, 4 or 5. My parents gave me a toy guitar. It was a white, blue, and red Fender Stratocaster with a. I mean, it was fake, but it still did have strings, and it did have a what do you call them? Sway bar, and I was obsessed with imitating the moves and mannerisms of the poodle rock bands of the day. I was very into Europe, especially, but like all of those cheesy hair metal bands. I said we called them poodle rockers in Sweden, in Swedish, but yeah, hair metal. I was like 4 or 5 years old when hair metal was at its peak, so there was a lot of hair metal on the TV,
Yeah.
and I was also very into Gary Moore. So just one song though, it was "Over the Hills," which was my favorite song when I was like, when was that? Like 1987 maybe. And so I was engaging with music. Then the first memory I have of actually making music and like doing something with it was like fourth grade, 11 years old maybe, when a friend taught me the power chord. I was a very very bad student when it came to music up to that point. Like I played in Sweden. You have to play the flute to learn notations.
Yeah. Similar
So
in
so I
Germany.
was forced. Yeah, so I was forced to learn the flute. I mean, this is very cruel. It's very cruel to the parents
Oh,
to force them to buy a flute for their 7-year-old kid. Very cruel. And I learned to read notes and well read sheet music. In Swedish, it's just reading notes, but yeah, sheet music. And I sounded terrible, of course. And they never give you anything good to play. They always just give you these horrible tunes to play, so it gets even worse. I was saying we were saying how cruel it is to force children to learn the flute
oh
just
yeah.
to be able
Oh
to
god.
read
And
sheet
the
music
teacher and the
because
parents.
yeah, yeah, having a child and having to tell your child, have you practiced the flute today, knowing full well that it might lead to your child actually practicing the flute. It's no, my parents were saints to bear this awful burden. And then, I mean, and I was saying when you disappeared that they always give you like really terrible things to play. and it's always terrible music. You always get to play something really, really horrible, like let's play Frère Jacques or something like that, and it's just So and then I got to play the guitar. I paid my dues. I played the flute for a year or two, whatever it is. I think it's just one. I hope it was just one. And then I got to start playing the guitar. But when you play the guitar, then it's the same thing. The only thing they teach you is like these terrible things. Let's play like 10 different terrible children's songs that you're gonna want to like drink to forget later on in life, and it's so I was a terrible student. I like used to play hooky a lot, not go to my guitar lessons because guitar lessons sucked. But then I had a friend, a cool kid, who was way into the Swedish hardcore wave. There was like this wave of hardcore punk from northern Sweden in the mid '90s. Bands like Refused and Raised Fists, etc., etc., etc. And this was music. There was basically metal, but boiled down to its most basic. So it was power chords.
Yeah.
It was like rhythmic usage of power chords and like screaming punk vocals, and it was when I learned the power chord, and it's so simple, but I never figured it out myself. And it's so simple. And when I learned the power chord, it just opened up this. My head exploded, literally. Just opened this world of possibilities. Suddenly, Suddenly, I knew what Nirvana was up to. Suddenly, I could like play songs that I actually knew, play songs that actually mattered to me. And it's just this one magical thing, like two fingers and. 2 fingers, maybe 3, if you wanna go fancy and do another note, and it just changed my life because that's when I started to write my own songs.
Yeah. So that's also the time when you started writing lyrics, text, and music both.
Yes, that's when I started writing my own songs because my cool friend also wrote his own songs, and I wanted to be cool like him, so I started to write my own songs. So when I was about 11 or 12 years old, I started writing my own songs, and I don't think I actually performed any of it or like showed anyone any of it until I started to go to music college a few years later, where they did have like small studios for the students where you could like where I started using Cubase and I started like actually recording my own material.
Yeah.
That's when I started to expose the world to my vision.
And when you listen back to those songs, do you still have them? Do you listen to them sometimes? The very first ones?
I actually have the very first one. I actually still have. I'm quite proud of the melody and like I think it sounds nice. I'm not very convinced by my singing style. It's very over the top. It's very theatrical, very like a lot of everything. There's no subtlety, because there is rarely subtlety in a 16-year-old boy, especially back in those dark days. And also the lyrics are pretty terrible, to the point of being a bit slightly shameful. So I mean, it's not a great first outing, but people were really impressed at the time. So I did receive a lot of encouragement, which in turn meant I kept going.
Which is good for all of us, that we now have your music. So is that first song ever going to be released?
No, secret for my ears only. Like